I think it's more that we have an expectation of what they're going to do every single day. I think in turn that is a little bit uncomfortable.
Welcome to Everybody Pulls the Tarp, the go-to podcast for high performers. I'm Andrew Moses, and each week I talk with Olympians, pro athletes, TV stars, Grammy winners, best-selling authors, CEOs, and other high performers to uncover their success secrets. Every conversation is jam-packed with inspiration and actionable ideas we all can apply to our own lives, personally and professionally. Get ready for a behind-the-scenes look at the techniques, processes, and mindsets powering the world's most successful people. Let's go. Hi, everyone. This week, I'm excited to welcome Creighton Volleyball Head Coach and three-time National Coach of the Year, Kirsten Bernthal Booth, back to Everybody Pulls the Tarp. For those of you who've been listening to this podcast for a few years now, you may remember my first conversation with Kirsten back in March of 2022. Either way, here's a quick refresher on Kirsten. In 2002, she inherited a 3-23 team, and since then steadily built Creighton Volleyball into one of the most successful, consistent programs in the country. Kirsten has led Creighton Volleyball on a remarkable run of success that includes an unprecedented 10 consecutive Big East regular season titles. Creighton has posted a .713 winning percentage during Kirsten's tenure, and the team has reached 13 of the last 14 NCAA tournaments. But Kirsten's leadership extends far beyond her work at Creighton. In addition to her role at Creighton, she also recently began her term as American Volleyball Coaches Association president and will serve as board president in 2024 and 2025. In our first conversation back in 2022, Kirsten and I explored what she learned as a young leader when she took over the Creighton Volleyball program at the age of just 27. And she gave me a behind-the-scenes look at the processes, mindsets, and techniques she used to catapult her team into a national powerhouse. And our latest conversation goes even deeper. We explored the incredible work she continues to do day-to-day leading Creighton, and dove into more detail on many of the ideas we talked about back in our original conversation. We also zoomed out and explored the role Kirsten also has on a national stage as American Volleyball Coaches Association president. This episode is filled with powerful ideas on leadership, collaborating with opponents for the greater good, and why we all win when we lift each other up. You'll hear actionable lessons that will help you become a better leader, energize communities around a common cause, and so much more. So let's pull the tarp and get straight to three-time National Coach of the Year, Kirsten Bernthal Booth. We first connected in March of 2022. Creighton Volleyball continues to roll on, but I'm most impressed the last couple of years with the growth of volleyball in general, women's volleyball, in terms of the number of eyeballs and the attention you all are getting. And I'm curious, Kirsten, are you feeling that growth from kind of the inside of the industry as well? And if so, what do you think is driving that?
Yes, the short answer is yes. We're definitely feeling it. We're very excited. At our annual convention in December, we got a lot of positive numbers. We're seeing growth in attendance. We're seeing massive growth from a television standpoint. I think part of it is the fact that people are starting to, television, for instance, the Big Ten said, okay, we're going to lean into women's volleyball and we're going to put them on. And guess what? We got tons of eyes. So I think that's our mantra as a sport as, hey, if you give us some runway, if you give us some opportunity, people love this sport. And I think the thing that a lot of us are most proud of is we're not doing it on the coattails of men. A lot of sports, the men do it and then the women try to catch up. And it's one of the few sports that women have more eyes on it than the men's side. And obviously we'd like to see growth on the men's side of volleyball too. And it is seeing growth, but nothing's propping us up right now. We're doing this. And when given the opportunity, people are enjoying it.
It's just a remarkable product, right? When you watch on TV, I find it's such an engaging sport. It's like you're always kind of on the edge of your seat. And I always struggled, Kirsten, with this kind of like chicken or the egg, like where people would say, oh, if people seem to care about the sport a lot. We'll put it on TV. Well, how are they going to discover that they care about the sport and that it's an entertaining sport and great television if it's not on TV, right? Like that's always been something that I've struggled to reconcile.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I don't know whether it's accurate or not, but I think most TV networks are run by men, unfortunately, right? And a lot of them never played volleyball. But what happens is some of them have daughters. You know, a lot of like NBA players, NFL players, their daughters have selected volleyball. I mean, it's the number one youth girls sport in the country right now. So I think those are kind of the eyes that are opening. Some people that have decision-making power are like, wait a second, maybe I didn't play this, but this is really entertaining.
I know you might be biased, but that's a staggering stat that I was not aware of. And as a dad to two young girls, what do you think is making volleyball the number one youth sport today?
It's an interesting question. And I don't know if I have a great answer for it. You know, it's a sport that's hard to pick up. It's a high skill sport, right? So it's not a sport that you can start in kindergarten and have the ball go back and forth over the net, right? Like soccer is a great sport for like a 3 and 4 year old because they can all kick the ball, right? But what we learn is, you know, they've tried to dumb it down. So they've tried to create scenarios so that softer ball, a lighter ball that'll stay in the air longer so that we can get youth in. But once they get the concept, it's, you know, it's obviously I'm biased, but it's a fun sport. I think some for the right, you know, and I say this because I've got daughters that play volleyball and some play basketball. So I'm seeing both sides, but some people, men or women, don't like sweaty bodies pounding on them constantly. I have one daughter that loves that and one daughter that hates that. And the one that hates it sure likes that net in between, that they're still playing a highly physical, aggressive sport. You know, high level volleyball is really impressive. You know, you're flying all over the place, but you're not taking a charge, right? You don't have someone coming into your body the way that basketball does. A lot of kids are choosing between volleyball and basketball. I would argue we need to work better so that kids can play both of them. They're both great sports, but I think the camaraderie of volleyball spends, you know, if you go to a volleyball match and you've never been there, a lot of times people are saying they spend more time cheering than they do playing. You know, it's a little over dramatized, but it's definitely a connecting sport. After each point, the team comes together. And I think as humans, a lot of people really like that.
You mentioned your role as a parent and having 3 kids. What's your view on whether or not kids should focus on one sport or multiple sports, and like when you're over specialized, like when specialization is good? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
We all know, if you look at the research, multi-sport's better, both for their bodies, their minds. We all know this, right? I'm sure everyone that you ask that to says that. The rub is we have to then support the kids in doing it. And as someone that has gone through this as a parent, we've been fortunate that we've had almost all coaches that have been supportive of our kids, but that's not always the case. And it could be subtle, like, oh yeah, we support multi-sport athletes. But then as soon as they miss something, it's like, oh, you're missing. Do you really have to go? And I think sometimes the coaches don't realize a statement like that for kids that don't want to let anybody down can deter them from doing it again. And so as coaches, one of the things that we've seen at our high school with my daughter that I've been so impressed with is a couple of the coaches will say to me, because I'm kind of friends with them, and they'll say, oh, I fake it a lot of times when I send you or your daughter someplace else, but I say, go, good luck, have a great practice, or good luck in your tournament. And inside I'm like, damn it, I don't want them to leave, right? But they don't say that. And I think sometimes people do, and these kids feel lousy. And I've seen it way too many times that like maybe missing one weekend or one game, one high school basketball game can mean that they won't play the next year because they felt so lousy. And I know you have the purists that say clubs should never supersede high school. And I get all those things, but the fact is club sports are here. And I think if you really, truly care about the kids, first and foremost, you need to take a deep breath. It's not about being selfish. It's about thinking about, okay, this kid actually wants to participate in multiple things. And that could be show choir. That could be the arts, all these different things. How do I embrace these kids that want to do multiple extracurriculars and not make them feel like they're doing something wrong by missing?
Well, speaking of issues affecting coaching more broadly, I want to dive into the role that you've recently stepped into, at the beginning of 2024 as the president of the American Volleyball Coaches Association. in addition to obviously your day job as the head coach of one of the best volleyball teams on the planet at Creighton. I'm curious, Kirsten, well, first off, is this your first time in a role like this for the AVCA, or is this a repeat tour of duty?
I have not been the president. I had a 6-year stint as the Division I rep. So I was on the board for a period of time, and then I was off for 4 or 5 years before I got the call that said, hey, can you do this? So I said, you must be desperate if you're calling again. So no, I'm excited to represent the coaches. And I think it's, like you said, it's such a great time for volleyball and the momentum that we have, and being part of positioning us to continue to take step forward is really fun.
So let's get into like the how. Like, I would imagine that there's a shift in kind of your mindset and approach when you're focused on one program and the success of one program day to day versus essentially the success of an entire industry. How do you go from somebody who's focused on one program, the success of one team, to now the success of the industry? How do you make sure that you take in a lot of different perspectives? How do you formulate what those focus areas are? I'm really curious to hear more about how you're doing that.
It's interesting you asked that, because I actually think about that a lot, and no one has asked me that question. Because, well, first let's start with women's Division I volleyball. And I'm representing I'm representing club, men's, boys, but let's just take this beast that I'm in, women's volleyball. With the landscape of the P4 versus the other conferences, volleyball and a lot of sports are going to take different avenues. And so what might be best for Creighton volleyball probably isn't going to be best for how we get our top leagues, the leagues that are really, if that's the Big 10, the SEC, the Big 12, AC, like those leagues have really leaned into volleyball a little bit more. How do I support them? Even though they're my personal rivals, right? But I think it's important that I can take those hats off. I find myself a lot of times saying, this isn't good for Creighton volleyball, but this is good for our sport of volleyball. And that has to supersede, especially if I have the chance to make some decisions or at least some recommendations in my role here. And then obviously I have, I think the thing that's different from my earlier role as the Division I rep, I was just doing women's Division I volleyball. That's who I was representing. Now it's representing beach volleyball, boys, girls, youth, all these different sectors, and trying to keep all of their needs, wants, desires in the forefront of my head as I'm making. Again, I'm not making a lot of the decisions, but I get to be part of the discussions and maybe make some recommendations.
You've been pretty vocal that there are some serious challenges in the industry, in particular around a lot of coaches who don't go about things the right way from a standpoint of recruiting violations and tampering and different things like that. And I'm curious, like, how do you walk that line, right? That line where you're competing with a lot of these folks, right? If it's kind of in your subset of the industry, but you're also trying to lift up the entire industry as a whole around some pretty complex issues. So how do you have those tough conversations? Are you having those tough conversations? Tell me a bit about that.
Our sport, generally speaking, for those of us that have been in it for a long time, I think we take a lot of pride in the fact that we do it the right way. And I'll give you some examples. So if you look at football and men's basketball, and I think even some other sports, once a kid makes a verbal commitment, a lot of coaches could care less. They are going to aggressively continue to recruit that kid. And that's not an NCAA violation. A lot of our coaches over the years have said, hey, once a kid makes a verbal commitment, we are going to honor that, because really it's about what are we teaching the youth, right? Like if they make a commitment to something, we want them to follow through. And so for me, it's been, this is the ethics I'd want my kid to have if they make a commitment to a school. And then if they want to pivot at some point, the thing that I would say to them is they need to let that school know that they're going to open their search. They're not going to do stuff behind backs and things. So I'll start with that premise that we've kind of prided ourselves as a sport of being above the line on a lot of things. But as money has gotten into volleyball more, which is great, our coaches are making more money. We're getting funded better at institutions. Sometimes nefarious actions start to take place. And I think it really came to a head at convention this year in December. Both the NCAA came and spoke to the coaches and said, hey, you guys are one of the worst offenders when it comes to tampering. And then I was in some coaches groups of, us saying like, this isn't who we want to be. So I took to social and just kind of called us out and said, it's not going to fix everything. I mean, a lot of people were like, first of all, I think a lot of people appreciated it, but then you'd have the people like, people are going to cheat. And you're right. There are going to be people that are going to cheat. But I also think sometimes if you call out the action and then people think, okay, I don't want to be part of that. Like, I'm going to do better. And maybe this is the idealistic version of me wanting these things to make an impact. But I also think a lot of times players and club coaches and parents didn't know that things that were happening actually are NCAA violations. So that was the other thing, is I wanted them to know if a kid from another university contacted their daughter and said, hey, my coach says we have a scholarship if you want to come, they might think that's really cool. But in fact, that's an NCAA violation.
That's really well said. And I think that's a powerful leadership lesson for anybody listening, regardless of what somebody does for a living or what they're involved in their community. In that, I think so often leaders have blind spots in terms of assuming that everybody's aware of all the rules and regulations, or everybody's aware of the impact that certain behaviors are having on an industry or a group of people or a community. And it's interesting, just you taking to social media and sharing your thoughts and perspectives is putting many people on notice that, hey, you know what? If I'm going to do this, do I want to be a part of this? Do I want to be a part of the narrative that's positioned this way, or do I want to be a part of the solution? I think that's a lesson that's important for all of us to remember with anything.
Yeah, hopefully. And again, I think we've got a lot of good people in our sport. It was amazing how many coaches came out. The hard part with being in the NCAA, and you probably know this, is the rules are hard. I mean, our compliance will say, if you don't have a minor violation at some point, you're not being honest with us, because there are so many little tiny things. So, when you put yourself out there, you're worried that people are going to be looking for you to, trying to take you down. I don't want to sound like I'm on a high horse, because I am far from perfect, but I do think you can make mistakes and be trying to do things right. And I think everyone kind of gets that within the coaching world. And then you can be intentionally violating rules to get players to advance your program, knowing that you're circumventing what the rules are.
I think there are definitely different flavors of mistakes. I've always been a big believer. I mean, what's the expression that the cover up is always worse than the crime, right? So there's people that intentionally endeavor to break the rules, and then they intentionally endeavor to cover it up. And then there's people who essentially, by moving, the phrase moving fast and breaking things, right? I mean, they're just impassioned and excited and make some mistakes. I think there are different flavors of mistakes, and it's important for us to remember. I give you a ton of credit for essentially taking responsibility to try and affect positive change in things outside of your program, right? Because it's, especially in this day and age where it's so competitive and the scrutiny is so high for college coaches in particular, it's easy for a coach to get laser focused on what's going on in their world and their ecosystem. So I'm curious, so how do you, when you run into coaches in the AVCA role that you're in now, who, again, don't see it the way you see it, aren't comfortable necessarily taking that leap from, hey, this is going to maybe hurt me competitively, but this is good for the industry and all. And maybe long-term, it's actually going to be good for all of us because we're going to solve some problems. Like, how do you have a conversation with another coach and try and move them onto your side, even though there's maybe some competitive tension?
It's interesting. When I was a young coach, I'm embarrassed to say that a lot of times, I don't think I showed it externally, but internally, I wasn't rooting for them, if that makes sense. Like, I know within the match, we're never rooting for them. Everyone wants to be, but maybe even off, I wasn't necessarily rooting for their success. I would say definitely as I've evolved and gotten older, I have learned that I can want to beat you so bad when we're on the court and prepare and try to do that. But I can root for you as a human in your program when we're not playing for each other. So I don't know what the key is, but I think perspective and seeing other people emulate that well, see people that had mentored me, and I could tell that they sincerely cared about me and our program, even though maybe I might be in the same league with them, right? But they were trying to advance. So that's been, and I get really frustrated now when I see a coach trying to tear someone down or tear me down, tear people down that are trying to do things the right way. So I try to remember that we are all on the same team. We want to advance the sport we love. We're trying to build women. There's so many pieces to being a coach, and try to keep that in perspective.
Really interesting, Kirsten. Recently, I've had a lot of conversations with best-selling authors, and I've been particularly impressed at the community that authors build with one another. Most of these are that I'm speaking about specifically now they're best-selling authors of fiction. A lot of them are in the same genre. And I asked them that question. I said, it's amazing to me how often on social media I see one author in really the same genre promoting an author's work in another genre. And that's really cool. That is really aligned with the message that I try and get out about everybody pulling the tarp and everybody working together to kind of lift each other up. But why do you think that is? And they said to me, Andrew, listen, traditionally somebody goes to a bookstore, they go to the historical fiction section and they take so-and-so's book off the shelf. Well, whose book do you think is like 3 over or 5 over or right next to the book that they're grabbing that I just promoted? It's mine, because I'm in the same genre. And we believe that essentially we need the genre to be bigger. And if the genre is bigger and there's more interest in, let's just call it historical fiction, there's going to be more people going in the bookstore to that section. There's more people on Amazon looking in that section. And then what do you think happens on Amazon? The algorithm recommends other things like this. So she said, we've really just figured out that it's better to hunt in packs and that somebody else's success is not my failure. And hearing you talk there kind of reminded me of that conversation. And I just think it's really profound.
Yeah, I love that they're thinking that way. And it takes a maturity, I think, to be able to. It's like people that win the lottery, you should be happy for them. And then you have some people that don't want them to have the lottery money, right? I just think it's a life perspective of, are you rooting for people or are you jealous of people?
Well, and I think there's a huge community aspect about it in sports too. And that sports has this amazing way of transcending what team you're a fan of or what team you work for or play for, in that people just love to rally around sports. We just saw in the last day or two here, the Georgetown women's basketball team. I mean, who could not be happy for the Georgetown women's basketball team right now with what they've had to endure this year and losing their coach right around the beginning of the season, being essentially projected to finish 10th in their conference. And now they're headed to the conference championship, and we'll see how it all goes from there. But who cannot be excited? I mean, I'm a Penn State guy, and I am glued to the Iowa basketball games now when Caitlin Clark is playing. And because my daughters are they're enraptured in this. They love it. My older daughter asked me the other day, she says, when Caitlin Clark broke the overall scoring record, she says, so my daughter's 8-year-old. So she says, is there a boy that's got more points than her now? And I'm like, no. She's like, really? I said, no. The look on her face, Kirsten, I will never forget. To me, it was a moment where she was like, I could accomplish anything. And she's just 8 years old. And I feel like it's so different for an 8-year-old girl versus somebody who would have been a girl growing up when I was born, or even earlier before that. But even she sensed that there was something off, that this is special and unique. And that I just think when anybody accomplishes something kind of in and around your space, it can have a really profound impact on everybody in it. So I'm just super proud of you and cheering you on that you're leading from the front always on this. But I want to shift the conversation back to Creighton a little bit. I enjoyed our conversation 2 or so years ago so much. I've enjoyed continuing to follow Creighton volleyball. And I recently listened back to our conversation, and there were so many interesting things that you said that I want to just dig into more. You mentioned something, you talked about kind of this idea of constantly challenging yourself and the team to always be growing. And you said our goal is to not get comfortable. And this is actually a theme that I've heard from so many coaches, so many high performers, this idea of not getting comfortable. Some will say something like, on the other side of adversity is growth. Some will say, when you're navigating adversity, it just means that you're working your way to success. So I want to kind of get into the how of this a little bit. For anybody listening who's trying to figure out, how do they get a little bit more uncomfortable in whatever they're doing so that they can grow? How do you do that? How do you facilitate high performers getting to a place where they feel uncomfortable, where it's not too uncomfortable, but it's not too easy either? What's the science, leadership philosophy behind that?
Gosh, that one's hard for me because I don't know if I have anything formulaic that we do to try to make our players uncomfortable. I think it's more that we have an expectation of what they're going to do every single day. I think in turn that is a little bit uncomfortable. And what I mean by that is you can't take a day off in our gym, right? So you can't come in and kind of go 50%, can't have a bad attitude. And there's days that I think people want to. Maybe they don't feel that well. They didn't get a good night's sleep. They have a fight with a significant, pick your poison of what's going on. We all have those days. I mean, I walk into the gym some days and I'm not in a good mental space and my expectation is I've got to turn it on. Well, I think that makes you uncomfortable, but it also means that if I feel that way going into a match, I know how to perform because I've had to do that in practice every day. So you can obviously create drills, you can do some team building things, but I think where I go is more proactivity. So what I do every year is we sit down as a staff and say, what are the potential pitfalls that we're going to run into this year? Okay, so this fall, we've got 19 players on our team. That's about 3 more than I like to have. So role acceptance is going to be a big issue, right? So how do we proactively prepare our team for that? So we try to think of, even if sometimes, being candid, sometimes we'll say this player could be a problem. If this player doesn't get the role that they want, this player could disrupt our team. How do we proactively prepare for that to happen if she doesn't earn the role? So we try to make sure we're thinking about those things so that we can prepare. And I think you have to handle the uncomfortable. I think some people will create scenarios that they know that it's going to cause dissonance within their team. I don't know if I necessarily do that. We do some vulnerability things. We'll talk through things. But I think all the things that we do in turn kind of prepares them to deal with difficult situations, which I think is the uncomfortable.
I want to double click on this idea of where you kind of anticipate the issues. Entrepreneurs have told me that in particular, a lot of them will do exercises in what they call anti-goals. So most leaders kind of start with, or conventional wisdom would say you kind of start with the goals. Like, what do you want to achieve? I've recently talked to some entrepreneurs who set these anti-goals. When they're setting out on an ambitious path, they essentially try and come up with all the things that are going to stop them.
Could go wrong.
And then they do everything in their power to avoid those. It's like management by avoidance of these hurdles and roadblocks. You're not necessarily always able to avoid, but you're building a plan to overcome a hurdle that you know is going to present itself. Have you experienced any resistance from other members of your staff or players when you address them on things that maybe you're anticipating as being challenges? I'm sure there's people that just don't want to deal with things until they present themselves. Talk about that for a moment.
Yeah, no, I think some of it comes from our coaching staff and some of it comes from outside people that we contract with, a mental performance coach that we have. And I think we involve them in the process. So we ask them, what do you see as the potential issues that this team could run into? It is the gamut. It could be partying, right? It could be team chemistry. It could be role acceptance. It could be injury. You can't prepare for injury, but we have to know that injury is a part of what we do. So how are we going to, as coaches, we have to prepare. We always have a backup plan, but is the team resilient enough to deal with those things? So we involve them. I really haven't had pushback because it's not negative. It's just, a coaching mentor told me long ago, the monkeys are going to come. You're going to have, like you said, hurdles every season. Some years it's bigger, some years it's smaller. But where I feel like as a coach I've evolved is you have an idea of what are the likely hurdles that are going to come. Some might sideswipe you. So what can I do to be prepared to handle that? So it's just a small hurdle as compared to a big hurdle, because the ship's going to kind of diverge at different times. You just don't want it to take a total turn, a U-turn.
Kirsten, another thing you said last time we were together on this podcast that I've gotten some questions from listeners about is you said, basically, if you come into our gym, you're going to hear a lot of different voices. You're not just going to hear mine. If you were observing our program and the way we work. And the question I got from a handful of folks was, well, first, was it harder for you earlier on in your career to get comfortable with that, right? Relinquishing some of the proverbial control. And then how do you, as a leader, essentially create an environment for that and manufacture that type of an environment? So talk about that for a moment, if you don't mind.
I think specifically when I came to Creighton, I was really young and I hired an assistant at the time that was way more qualified than I was. And so letting him have a strong voice was very easy for me because, honestly, I thought he was probably a better on-court coach than I was. So one of the things I do think I do pretty well is be able to say, I'm not great at this, or I need to develop in this. So I allowed that. I will say, as I've grown, I feel like I've gotten better in those areas. I do think sometimes it's manufactured. I'm very deliberate to try to give people autonomy and things. And guess what? It has made my life a heck of a lot easier. But the key is you have to hire great people and you have to make sure they're great and you have to mentor them to be great. And if they're not great, you have to either figure it out or have them leave. And I've fortunately, I think I've had to kind of encourage someone to leave once in my career. I've had really amazing staff. But I'll give an example. Like I have 2 associate head coach. I have one that's been with me the entire time. I hired her when she was 22 and now she's married and 2 kids and closer to my age than even when we started, as I like to say. And we've just developed together. We both were in our mid to early 20s when we started, and both of us have just kind of navigated and grown. But my other associate head coach is on year 2, and he's a former head coach, D2 head coach, really good. And he's a head coach. So how do I keep a head coach on my staff that I think is really good? So like, for instance, he's taken, as of last fall, he took the lead in our practice planning. So you can imagine that's hard, right? And the good thing is we have a great relationship. And I said, listen, one of my concerns is if you take the lead in this and you eventually leave, because I'm not naive that at some point I think he'll go get a head coaching job again, I can't have lost my credibility with the team. So we have to work in collaboration as we do this, that maybe you're doing the planning, you have a much bigger voice in practice, which he does, but my voice is still important. And I feel like we've done a really good job of balancing that, of him leaning to me sometimes and making sure my voice continues to be heard, but still giving him a ton of leadership and taking the lead in this.
You go again, Kirsten, with the scenario planning and working through, like, it just seems like you're phenomenal at anticipating challenges and anticipating roadblocks that could pop up based upon a direction that you go. That's an important lesson. I feel like I want to put a pin in. I'm making a note here on this. Again, this idea of scenario planning, that first, it was hard for you to delegate, or it could be hard to relinquish some level of control or whatnot. But then to have the wherewithal to go have a conversation with him about where you thought the pitfalls in that could be, I think is just, again, really interesting.
Yeah, I don't even think of it that way, but now that you say it, wow, that was really good. Just kidding.
Well, it all comes from great experience. Your story is remarkable. Like I said, the last time we talked, you inherited a 3-23 team in 2002. As you said, the last time you were very green. As you just mentioned, you felt like there were folks on the staff that may have been better on-court coaches than you. And since then, you've just built an incredible resume. Creighton Volleyball is 441 and 184 during your tenure, which is just incredible. You've reached 12 of the last 13 NCAA tournaments, an unprecedented 9 straight outright Big East regular season titles. Just an incredible, incredible run of success. So I'll ask you now, and hopefully we talk again in a few years after you've piled up more victories. But when you reflect on it all, if you had to come down to like one thing that has made you successful and in turn made the program successful, like one skill, if someone out there is like, I can focus on one skill, what would Kirsten say is the one that that you believe has been the most critical to your success, and therefore others listening should focus on the most?
Probably emotional intelligence. And what I mean by that is being able to read people. I think a lot of times we use the term like push buttons, and I think sometimes that's in a negative way. I actually don't see it that way. It's being able to tell if a kid's struggling, if a kid wants to be goofy with you, but to relationship build. I truly believe in anything that we're leading, we have to build relationships, and that's how we can push people further than they really want to go, or be the teammate that we want them to be. Maybe I don't I'm not happy that I've lost my starting spot, but I know the coaches care about me. I know they care about the team, and they're not going to make personal decisions directed at me. They're going to make decisions that they think are best for the team. And I'm bought into that. And I don't think you can do any of that without building those relationships.
On the emotional intelligence front, because I think that's a great point. You've got me thinking about a lot of different stuff here, Kirsten. And I'm curious, like whether you're a coach, a CEO, a parent, a friend, a spouse, how can people become more aware of their surroundings in that regard, right? So it's not pushing buttons, as like you said, with more of a negative connotation. It's being aware and adapting to the different situations and surroundings that present itself in the relationships that are important to us. I'm curious, are there skills you develop, specific things that you're doing, mindset shifts that get you in a place where you can be more aware?
First of all, I think it's hard. I think some people have it more innately than others. And I think sometimes great coaches that don't have it know they don't have it and surround themselves with people that do, because you have to have someone on staff, I think, that can do it. But I think the big thing that I've learned over the years that it probably has helped me is you can't communicate too much, and then you have to listen and not react. So an example would be a player coming in and being upset and talking to me, I don't think you're treating me fairly, or you're whatever they're coming at you with. You are never going to build that rapport with an athlete if you attack back. And so one of the things that I've learned, and I actually think I did this early in my career, is that even though internally I might be like, wrong, we all, when we get attacked, that might be how we feel. I really try to be like, and I'm being sincere in this, like, I appreciate you coming and talking to me. And I know it has to be hard. And I'm not saying I don't defend myself if I don't think it's just, but at least I know where their perspective is, and then I can give them my perspective. But I think you have to listen to what they're saying. Because if you're hearing something over and over, and I think that sometimes I get frustrated with maybe, I have some coaching people that I mentor, and they're having the same issue over and over, but they're pointing blame to that kid's soft. They think this. And at some point you're like, okay, seems to be something that lots of players are telling you. So maybe it's time that you look internal to say, okay, how can I be better? Because trust me, there are plenty of things that players have said that I'm like, oh, that kind of hurts, but gosh, that they probably are right. And so I need to be better at that. We are not perfect. And I think if you approach, even if like you're a high school coach, if you tell parents, I know I'm not perfect, I'm going to make mistakes, but I hope I'm coming from a good place for your son or daughter. So if you can give me the benefit of the doubt, I just think there's so many things, if you can just communicate with people and let them know I'm not perfect, but I'm going to try to do you right. And if not, come talk to me and we'll work through it. You can, again, those big hurdles become much smaller hurdles.
I was smiling when you were doing the wrong, Kirsten, because I know I've been guilty of that at times, right? And it's something I think that a lot of us have to work on. And I just want to thank you again for this wonderful conversation. As always, with you, it's a masterclass on life and leadership and coaching. And I'm so grateful for the time that we've gotten to spend together, the time that I've gotten to learn from you. And then I know that there are so many across the industry and beyond who appreciate what you do and learn from you every day. So thank you, as always, for being a tarp puller. You are, once again, stamped and certified to be a part of this Everybody Pulls the Tarp community forever. So Kirsten Bernthal Booth, thank you so much for spending some time with me this week. And we'll have to catch up again, hopefully not too long, and as you continue to rack up wins and conference championships and things like that. So thank you again for your time this week.
Well, thank you. And I love what you're doing and how you're promoting leadership in a positive way. So appreciate you. And thanks for letting me be on again.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining me this week. Be sure to subscribe in your favorite podcast app so you can catch all of our upcoming episodes. And if you are like me and want a world full of tarp pullers, then leave a review to help others find us. You can also follow me on Twitter at Andrew H. Moses. That's Andrew H. Moses. And be sure to sign up for my email newsletter at everybodypullsthetarp.com/newsletter. I'll share tips and insights to help you achieve maximum success and happiness. Today's a great day to pull the tarp. I am rooting for you. See you next time.